the defendant stands accused of heinous crimes: assault, trespassing, and the most grievous offense of all, murder. Does the accused have anything to say in their defense? Yes, dear viewer, this is a real trial that actually happened. A real pig was put on trial for murder. It had a judge, it had witnesses, and by the end of it, well, let's just say medieval justice wasn't exactly merciful. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because to truly understand how we arrived at a world where donkeys needed defense lawyers and grasshoppers could be excommunicated by the church, we must start at the beginning. The accused stands charged with attacking and killing a human child. The punishment, should it be found guilty, is death. As you probably know, pigs usually struggle with judiciary terminology, and so naturally, the court very easily found the accused guilty. Thus, the pig was marched solemnly to the gallows and hanged in the town square like any other criminal, watched by dozens, perhaps hundreds, of grim-faced townsfolk who genuinely believed justice had just been served. Was this really the first animal trial? Not even close. This was merely the first recorded animal trial, held in 1266 in Fontenay-aux-Roses, France. But let's face it, by the time someone decided to document this insanity, animals had been facing human courts for centuries. Why did people do this? Well, the first thing you need to understand is that justice in the Middle Ages was not about fairness. It wasn't even about logic. It was about order. Medieval society ran on a simple rule: everything must have its place. Kings ruled, peasants obeyed, the church watched everything, and if a pig kills a child, the pig must face justice, because everything must be accounted for. To not punish the pig would mean admitting that sometimes bad things happen because of how our world works, and that was simply not an option. So instead, they built an entire legal framework to justify their fear of chaos. Now, you might be wondering, surely someone, anyone, stood up and said, "Wait, this is stupid." The answer is yes, but they were ignored. For centuries, legal scholars wrestled with the idea of whether animals could even be guilty of crimes. The Romans had already stated that animals were senseless and couldn't commit crimes. Thomas Aquinas later argued that animals can't be held accountable because they lack moral reasoning. And in 1283, just a few years after this pig trial, French jurist Philippe de Remy pointed out that criminal acts require intent. And yet, none of that stopped people from marching this pig to the gallows. Why? Because the law was never about the pig. It was about the theater of fear, the performance of control. And once you accept that a pig can be criminal, well, then all bets are off. Because what happens when the accused doesn't show up to court? What if the defendant is nowhere to be found? What if the defendant is an entire colony of rats? Oh yeah, that happened. And this time, they had a defense attorney. Our next accused are rats. Hundreds of them, scattered throughout the town. And they had rather inconveniently failed to show up to their own trial. A problem? Not at all, because this was medieval France, where justice must be done even if it makes absolutely no sense. And so, rather than dismissing this absurd case, the court took the only logical step. They assigned to the rats a defense attorney. Meet Barthélemy de Chasseneux. Barthélemy wasn't some random nobody. He was a respected jurist, an intellectual, a man whose legal career would later take him to the highest levels of law in France. But in 1508, he found himself representing rodents in court. And to his everlasting credit, he took the job incredibly seriously. Because, well, this wasn't just a secular trial. This case was happening before an ecclesiastical court in Autun, meaning It wasn't just about laws, but about sin, morality, and the church's authority over every living creature. If rats were found guilty, then their crime wasn't just theft of grain, it was an affront to divine order, which meant they had to be punished. And so the trial began. The prosecution's case. The grain supplies had been ravaged by an infestation of rats. This vermin had caused economic damage, food shortages, and general misery. So naturally, town folks did what any rational society would do. They sued the rats. The judge, being a man of both law and faith, agreed. The rats had been officially summoned to court. They had been given a fair warning, and now, having failed to appear, they were in violation of court orders. Surely this was an open and shut case. No. Chesnus was not about to let his clients go down without a fight. So he did what any good lawyer would do. He found a loophole. He didn't argue that the trial was stupid. He didn't argue that rats weren't people. That would be too obvious. Instead, he cleverly argued that, yes, the rats had every intention to attend court. How dare anyone suggest otherwise? But the roads were simply far too dangerous, filled as they were with bloodthirsty predators like cats, dogs, and even humans. And since the law required all defendants to have safe passage to court, the rats could not be expected to appear unless the town guaranteed their safety. A brilliant move, because now the judge had a problem. If he ruled against the rats, he would be breaking the very legal principles he was supposed to uphold. If he ruled for the rats, he would be granting legal protections to vermin. Either way, this case had spiraled into a full-blown medieval legal disaster. But who actually won? Historians disagree on exactly how the case ended. Some believe the court eventually dismissed the case due to its sheer absurdity. Others argue that the town just moved on, realizing that punishing rats wasn't exactly enforceable. But what we do know is that Chestnut walked away victorious. His career skyrocketed after this. His brilliant legal defense of rats made him famous, and he went on to become one of the most influential legal minds in France. Yes, this man built his career by defending rats, and in a way, he was right. Because if the legal system insists on treating animals like people, then it has to follow its own rules. But you see, punishing animals wasn't just a legal matter. It was a religious one too. And that meant that sometimes animals weren't just criminals. Sometimes they were heretics, witches, servants of Satan. And when that happened, the church got involved. Which brings us to one of the strangest trials of all time, the case of the rooster who was burned at the stake. In 1474 in Basel, modern Switzerland, the world faced an existential crisis. A rooster laid an egg. This was a full-blown emergency. Panic, chaos, feathered blasphemy in broad daylight. You see, in a world where everything was supposed to follow God's divine order, roosters did not lay eggs. Ever. This was simply not allowed. So when it happened, there was only one possible explanation: witchcraft. And in true medieval fashion, they did the only thing that made sense to them. They put the rooster on trial. For sorcery. Yes, a chicken was accused of satanic magic, and somehow nobody thought this was funny. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but why was this such a big deal? It's just an egg. Oh, but you see, it wasn't just an egg. This was a legendary egg. According to medieval folklore, if a rooster laid an egg, something truly monstrous would hatch from it. A basilisk. A mythical serpent so deadly that its very gaze could kill a man instantly. A creature born not from nature, but from dark magic. And so, this was no longer about one weird bird. This was an existential threat. and in medieval Europe, existential threats went to trial. And so, in a solemn courtroom surrounded by learned men of faith and law, a chicken was condemned for witchcraft. The sentence? Death by fire. Because when faced with the unholy terror of rooster's egg, medieval justice did what it did best. It set things on fire. But this case wasn't like the others. This wasn't a pig on trial for murder or rats stealing grain. This was something deeper. This was about fear itself. Look at the historical records and you'll notice something strange. See that spike in trials? That's the peak of European witch hunts, and right alongside it, vermin trials. Why? Because in the medieval mind, the world was simple. God's order versus chaos. And anything that defied that order, be it a woman living alone in the woods or a rooster laying an egg, was an agent of evil. It was the same fear, just applied to different victims. Fear of unexplainable, fear of losing control. Because if a rooster could lay an egg, then what else was possible? Monsters, witches, demons hiding in plain sight. And in a world like that, there was only one solution. The church had to step in. Which brings us to the next story. The church using animal trials for control. What do medieval weevils and divine wrath have in common? Apparently everything. The year is 1545. For months, local vineyards have been under siege. Not by invading armies, but by an unstoppable plague of weevils. The farmers have tried everything. Burning, trapping, even primitive pesticides, but nothing has worked. So in true medieval fashion, they turn to the only power they truly fear, the church. They demand action, a divine justice, so to say, and the church agrees to hold a formal trial against the weevils. But when the case is presented before Bishop François Bonivard, he does not order a punishment for the insects. Instead, he issues a punishment for the people. His ruling is clear. The weevils are not just insects. They are instruments of God's wrath, and they have come to punish the town for its sins. And if the people want the plague to stop, they must do 3 things. Repent, attend 3 special masses, and pay their overdue tithes to the church. The farmers, terrified and desperate, complied. And after they did, well, the weevils disappeared, or so it was reported by the church. But decades later, in 1587, the weevils, clearly unconvinced by previous repentance, returned for round 2. Once again, they ravaged the vineyards. Once again, the farmers turned to the church. And once again, the church agreed to hold a trial. But this time, the case took a strange turn. Instead of blaming the people for their sins, the church tried something new. They negotiated with the bugs. The judge actually discussed the possibility of offering the insects their own land, a designated territory just for the weevils, as long as they agreed to leave the vineyards alone. But there was a catch. What if the weevils refused to comply? Oh, well, then they would be excommunicated, of course. The church was actually prepared to banish the bugs from Christianity. Did the weevils accept the deal? Obviously the weevils weren't available for comment, but sources suspect they weren't particularly worried about eternal damnation, because the final page of the court records, it survived in such terrible condition that no one could read it, presumably chewed up by the defendants themselves. And no, I'm not making that up. Yet the madness continued. At this point, we've seen pigs treated as criminals, rats given legal defense, roosters accused of witchcraft, bugs used as a tool for financial extortion. But as insane as all of this is, it still wasn't the end. Because even as science and reason slowly started creeping into society, people just couldn't let go of these trials. They had become a ritual, a tradition, And so even centuries later, animals were still being tried, punished, and imprisoned. A regiment of Austrian soldiers was stationed in town. Among them was a drummer, a humble soldier whose job was simply to signal orders by beating a drum. Like many soldiers, he had a companion, his loyal dog. Well-trained, faithful, likely unaware it was about to make a terrible mistake. The exact details are murky. Some say the dog bit a nobleman, others insist it was a town councillor. But what we do know is this: it wasn't savage. It wasn't fatal. Just one bite, and suddenly it wasn't a dog anymore. It was a criminal, and criminals had to be punished. The court ruled swiftly. The dog was found guilty, and for its crime, it was sentenced to 1 full year in an iron cage. An iron cotton line, to be precise, which was essentially a fool's cage. And so our poor dog spent the next 365 days locked in a metal cage in the town square where everyone could see it. A visible, humiliating sentence to remind everyone that even animals had to respect authority. It is only by the 19th century that animal trials mostly disappeared. But here's the thing: humans don't really change. In 2008, a bear in Macedonia was convicted of stealing honey. In 2013, a goat was arrested in Nigeria for allegedly being a shape-shifting criminal. So, before we laugh too hard at the past, maybe we should ask ourselves, are we really any different?